Sticking with that, the ISIS brides fiasco deepened today, with the Prime Minister still insisting that the government is not helping with their repatriation. But that's a lie, because under any reasonable definition, helping someone get the Australian passport and citizenship needed to land here off an international flight is assisting with repatriation. Put simply, without Albo's passport in their hands, these Islamic State radicals would have no way of boarding a plane, let alone landing in Australia. So don't be fooled by lines like this from the Prime Minister, trying to sound tough when in reality he is bending over backwards for these women.
We are providing no assistance to these people and won't provide any assistance to these people, but we won't breach Australian law.
And look, it's not just the Prime Minister. As revealed to you here last night, so too Dr Jamal Rifi, a staunch defender of Immigration Minister Tony Burke, who has also reportedly travelled to Syria to help these women return. And if reports are accurate, it's been Rifi who's handed them their new passports. Today, the ABC reported that the manager of the Syrian camp said this of these women, and I quote, "The Australian government had prepared the camp residents' passports and travel paperwork and suggested that their families collect these documents, presumably before going to Syria to deliver them."
دولة أستراليا جو سياسة بتشكي أمور نواهنا مشاكل نوا سياسات نوادنا هنا كدولة أستراليا دمان هذا أما نكارن هرن وادرخن وابينن سربي أساسي قلنا مع الباتا قد بدم كارن بينن أم وك دولة أميش ورد جواز سفرة شفا مع الباتا كنت كام بارو جامي جواز سفرة ورقياتي واشيكر هن وك مع الباتا هرن واستلام كش كام بيدرخن بين.
It's interesting there, isn't it, that she used the repatriation word. In Syria, they're calling it repatriation. Only in the Prime Minister's office, they are not. Now, the first question for a government that claims not to be assisting in these terrorist sympathisers' repatriation is how these passports came to be issued in the first place. To obtain a passport in Australia, an applicant needs original copies of documents such as a birth certificate or a naturalisation certificate or a previous passport. They also need a guarantor to vouch for their identity, and then it is mandatory. Now, I repeat, mandatory for the application to be lodged personally at an embassy. In this case, personal lodgement would not have been possible because there's no Australian consular presence in Syria, and the residents in these camps have been kept up until now in detention. So how and why have the legal rules here been circumvented? And which Labor minister, and we deserve to know names, has bent the rules? Is it Tony Burke as a quid pro quo for Jamal Rifi defending him at the last election? We've put questions to Burke about this. And we also need answers as to how any of these people could have lodged a valid passport application without any of the documents needed, the birth certificate, the guarantor of identity, because almost certainly the documents that they took with them when they joined Islamic State a decade ago would have long been lost or destroyed. Now, if someone's overseas and they've got an urgent need for an emergency passport, that can be issued, but two things must happen here. It first requires them to have a valid passport in the system, not necessarily in their possession, obviously, but in the system. And to get it done, to make it happen, it requires the very intervention of officials that the Prime Minister insists he's not doing. Now, alternatively, the government could issue what's called official facilitation letters that request local authorities to facilitate travel through a country or to board an aircraft in order to reach an Australian embassy and get a passport. However, to work, these facilitation letters usually require high-level diplomatic coordination. In other words, again, the sort of government assistance that the Prime Minister again today denies he is providing. So where are the specific questions to the Prime Minister and Burke that I am raising here for them to rule out this sort of support? Also today, the Prime Minister insisted that Australian citizens are automatically entitled to have passports issued. But since when has this been doable through relatives? Or indeed through Tony Burke's political ally, Dr Rifi?
34 women and children have received passports, so clearly the government is helping in that respect.
No, people are having an implementation of Australian law is what is happening.
What's more, for all this talk about applying the law, the Prime Minister's conveniently forgotten he already has all the powers he needs to refuse these women a passport. And that's because all of these women left Australia to travel to a terrorist-controlled war zone, and that's a breach of Australian law under the Passports Act. Meaning Albanese could stop these women coming to Australia under existing laws, but he doesn't want to. He chooses not to, despite the grave risk they all potentially pose to this country. Here is former Detective Superintendent David Craig making this very sober assessment on my show last night.
It's my opinion that every single one of these ISIS brides is either fully radicalised or subservient to those that are. That's the only way you could end up in trying to be part of an Islamic caliphate and leave a peaceful country to go and do so. Now, if they're either of those two, they are an unacceptable risk.
And this too on their trophy status amongst Islamists in Australia, and so to their children, some of whom are close to adulthood.
They come back with a lot of credibility, if you like, in radical Islam because they've actually been there. They actually were part of the jihad. For these kids to be raised with that mindset and now come back to Australia, how are they? It's not fair to try and expect them to integrate fairly or be treated fairly by Western society when they come back with that sort of evil credibility.
David Craig, a former AFP, Australian Federal Police expert in counter-terrorism. That's his view. He knows what he's talking about. Let's never forget, ISIS wanted these women to leave Australia to engage in jihad, to join a terror organisation, to breed the cubs of the caliphate, they were called, to breed the next generation of killers. It wasn't just terrorists that ISIS sought to recruit in the West, but women to breed radical Islamic hate. When pushed about the involvement of a long-time political ally, Dr. Rifi, in helping these terrorist sympathisers, Tony Burke claimed ignorance, telling the media he's got no idea if Rifi's overseas and that he hasn't discussed any of this with him. Well, what a crock. Tony Burke is the Home Affairs Minister. He would have access to any passport movements by Rifi. He would be able to find out within minutes if Rifi's left the country and in what country he now might be. Indeed, if you or I had allegations levelled to us about someone we were close to, the first thing we would probably do is call them and ask, wouldn't we? The fact that Burke hasn't called Rifi is because he doesn't want confirmation that it is his mate in Syria. Or he already knows he's there. Because Burke has been found out before, having closed-door meetings with Rifi that he tried and failed to keep secret. Today too, the new Shadow Defence Minister, Senator James Patterson, demanded that the government issue temporary exclusion orders to stop the return of these women.
Temporary exclusion orders are a very important tool that is designed to keep Australians safe. It appears that they're associated with the listed terrorist organisation, ISIS, which is a crime. It is possible that they breached the declared area provisions, which prevented Australians from going to Iraq and Syria during the period of Islamic State. And it's also possible that while they were there, they participated in the crimes of ISIS.
And late this afternoon, we learned that the government has indeed sought one of these very orders to block one of the women, just one, from returning to Australia for at least 2 years. Now, there are two important points to make following this news this afternoon. The first is that clearly the government seems to have issued passports to these women before they did any security assessments. And now they're issuing this order to keep one of them out because she is a security risk. The second point I want to make, if the government can keep one out, it can keep them all out, as they must, as Britain and many other countries have done and continue to do. And as Australians clearly expect their government to do, especially after the Bondi massacre. These are known Islamic State women. And we have clear links, as alleged by police and intelligence agencies in the court this week, between the alleged Bondi gunmen and Islamic State. If the police are right, Islamic State was the genesis of December's terror attack in Sydney. So why on earth would we allow back into this country anyone, man, woman or child, connected with this terrorist organisation? I mean, how stupid are we? It's bad enough that Labor is doing what they are doing. It's even worse that they've been caught out lying about it and they are still trying to cover it up.
But first tonight, even after the Bondi massacre, the decay in social cohesion, the breakdown in national security, Labor still doesn't get it. It's all at sea when it comes to the so-called ISIS brides. Tony Burke was missing in action today. No media, no accountability. All the while, 11 families, 34 people in total, are hoping to head here via Damascus in the coming days to live a fulfilled life, a world away from the death cult which they willfully married into. Anthony Albanese was trying to talk tough.
We are doing nothing to repatriate or to assist these people.
Technically be repatriating this latest cohort back to Australia. It's not paying for their flights per se. But Anthony Albanese wants you to think that he's at arm's length from this. And we have seen this ducking and weaving play out before, and I'll show you that in a moment. Now, my colleague Shari Markson is reporting that the latest ISIS brides trying to return here have not been interviewed by Australian authorities in more than 3 years, and 3 of the group are considered high risk. The last time interviews were conducted with this cohort of 34 individuals was back in 2022. And based on assessments, police and security agencies are highly concerned about 3 of those. Now, in the last few hours, Labor has slapped a temporary ban on one of the ISIS brides, preventing her from returning home from Syria. But what about the rest of them? And when asked today, what are you going to do to stop these people getting here? This is what the Prime Minister said.
Is the government considering implementing a temporary exclusion order on the women and children wanting to return to Syria?
We take national security advice and we will do what we can to keep Australians safe within the law.
The 34 women and children have received passports, so the government is helping in that respect?
No, people are having an implementation of Australian law is what is happening. We are providing no assistance to these people and won't provide any assistance to these people, but we won't breach Australian law.
OK, so the Prime Minister has acknowledged that ISIS brides have been issued passports. I mean, they weren't issued out of thin air. Australia has given them passports. The Prime Minister does have the powers here. He says we can't break the law. The Prime Minister has powers. And sure, some may indeed be Australian citizens. So why has nothing been done? Why has Labor not learnt from its past mistakes? Do everything in its power to make sure that they can never return. And we've seen this train wreck play out. Don't forget, Tony Burke provided assistance to Save the Children charity, which successfully returned last year's ISIS brides cohort to Australia. In September last year, The Australian published this report that the ISIS brides were to be returned home. A spokesperson for Tony Burke at the time denied it, saying the federal government was not directly involved in the mission to bring the cohort home. And the Prime Minister said that there was nothing to see here.
What actions has your government taken to guarantee the safety of Australians if these people return?
Those reports are not accurate.
Now, just remember those denials. And yet, surprise, ISIS brides still managed to smuggle themselves out of Syria and return to Australia soon after. And the performance in Senate estimates was just as woeful.
Senator Wong, is the Prime Minister aware of how many ISIS brides are now in Australia?
I will take that on notice.
Look, I find it very hard to believe that the Foreign Minister and the Prime Minister would have been unaware of a security risk coming into this country, let alone not knowing how many brides were here. And Penny Wong continued to tie herself in knots.
The government has said that they have not provided assistance to returning ISIS brides. How does the government define assistance?
Repatriation assistance.
Does the Prime Minister consider providing citizenship by descent to be assistance?
The government the government has been clear that we are not providing assistance to repatriate, and there is no plan to repatriate these individuals.
So it is not assisting someone to return to Australia to provide them with the documents they need to enter Australia?
Well, it's
all at sea, back then, and now, again today.
You make your bed, you lie in it.
Look, Anthony Albanese is desperately trying to distance himself from this, handballing over to the Immigration Department so he can avoid accountability. And don't forget that a key Tony Burke backer, Friends of Burke leader and leading Muslim doctor Jamal Rifi is reportedly coordinating the latest repatriation. That's according to the Nightly. Jamal Rifi was in that meeting with Save the Children and Tony Burke last year. And in that same meeting, Burke asked a senior public servant from Home Affairs to leave the room so that he could speak freely. A handwritten note from the Home Affairs Secretary, Stephanie Foster, recorded Burke saying that assistance would be provided to the ISIS brides after they returned to Australia. So both Burke and the PM claim they knew nothing about the return of the ISIS brides and played no role. And now here we go again. We have to wait and see if those 34 people make it out of Syria and onto a plane here. The opposition's Home Affairs spokesman isn't buying Labor's latest spin.
I'm concerned that the government is turning a blind eye. If they were serious about national security, they would have investigated and also put in place these temporary exclusion orders well before now, because the one thing we can't have is these people, ISIS brides, coming back to Australia when they present such a risk to our nation and its security.
Shadow Defence Minister James Patterson has also raised concerns.
But I'm very concerned that we appear to have a freelance repatriation operation being run by a private citizen. Media reports indicate Dr Jamal Rifi is running this. Now, he's a respected member of the community, but he's a private citizen. He shouldn't be running repatriation operations.
And look, they're right. In the end, these are not innocent women. They knew exactly what they were doing when they left this country. And sure, we can sympathise with their children. It wasn't their fault that they were born into this. But we don't know what these children have seen. We don't know what they've been exposed to and what ideology has been instilled in them. And we certainly cannot risk a generation of young Islamic radicals coming in. The director of the camp that the families had been staying in, the Roj camp in Syria, has today confirmed that the repatriation process has started.
Today, we at the camp administration handed over 11 families, 34 people of Australian nationality, to their families. This is the first trip in 2026.
And don't forget, these women ended up at the camp after their husbands were either captured or killed when ISIS was defeated in 2019, or their husbands may have even returned here already. We don't know. Among those in Rhodes is believed to be Shamima Begum, a British-born woman who entered Syria to join ISIS in 2015 at just 15 years old, and she was subsequently stripped of her British citizenship. Now, Labor is hoping on a Women of Prayer that somehow these women don't make it out of Syria and are no longer indulging in the death cult ideology, which has seen tens of thousands of innocent people murdered, burned alive, beheaded, all in the name of Allah. But Labor has the powers here. After everything that's happened in this country, the government still doesn't get it. Albo says they've made their beds. Yeah, they're coming to a bed near you.